The word nostalgia comes from the Greek nostos, meaning homecoming, and algos, meaning pain. It was originally used to describe a sickness, a condition marked by physical and mental suffering caused by the desire to return to one's native place. Memory is supposed to bind friends together. That's the story we tell ourselves. Shared weekends, old houses, the same jokes resurfacing on schedule. But memory doesn't always stay where it's put. It seeps, it corrodes. And when it conjures things back, it has no regard for comfort or sentiment. It seems the Greeks had it right.
You're listening to tonight's Terror, original horror stories to hear in the dark. Subscribe and share if you're a fan. And now, tonight's story.
Buck carried a box to the dining table with both hands. It was heavier than he expected, dense enough that he adjusted his grip halfway there. The rental house was quiet, except for the heat. The baseboard units clicked on and off in uneven intervals. Outside, the walk and driveway were buried under snow that had been shoveled once and then abandoned. Chris's SUV and Buck's truck sat side by side, both dusted white again. They only got the place in winter because no one else wanted it then. In summer, it would have been booked solid. Buck's daily life was typically filled with visits to bridges, culverts, and municipal buildings. He conducted inspections and audits for the city as a civil engineer. His work was predicated on mitigating risk. Buck lived his personal life absent of that caution. He wouldn't tell his companions that the beers missing from the 30-pack he'd brought through the door were already crumpled and empty on the floor of his truck. Stephen stood at the stove with a pot of wine. He had rolled up his sleeves and set his phone on the counter beside him, timer running. Orange peel floated at the surface. Cinnamon sticks knocked gently against the side of the pot as he stirred. Steam curled upward in lazy ribbons. Buck watched him and opened a beer with a snap. Stephen was an in-home nurse. His weeks were filled with the final days and moments of the terminally ill. He'd developed an iron repression of the 1,000 tragedies that dotted the landscape of his working life. He was lively and driven, a person who rarely looked back. His friends joked that nostalgia was a kind of sickness to him. Chris leaned against the counter across from him with a glass already in his hand. He had poured something clear and strong from a bottle he'd brought with him. Chris had driven himself and Stephen 2 hours to the rental house in his Land Rover. He was a successful insurance salesman. Like Buck, he spent a great deal of energy identifying risk and then convincing others to see it too. He watched Stephen work over the stove like it was a performance.
So this is a whole thing, huh?
Chris said. Stephen looked up from the pot.
It's mulled wine. It's not so complicated.
But you're treating it like a ritual,
Chris said. Stephen tasted the wine, nodded once, and turned the heat down.
Well, that's because it is. And if you drink enough, you'll be cursed.
Buck set the box down and exhaled. The lid art faced up, a dark city skyline, gears and smokestacks, a river cutting through the center like a wound. Above it all, a symbol that looked religious without belonging to any religion Buck recognized. The title was embossed in dull silver, Blackwater Protocol. Chris looked over at the massive game box and whistled.
Lovecraftian steampunk. You went full genre.
It had good reviews, Buck said. Stephen carried 3 mugs to the table and set them down carefully.
He's right. I watched some YouTube stuff on it. It looks good. And it's cooperative. That's important.
Chris picked up his mug and sniffed it.
So nobody can screw anyone else over.
Stephen nodded.
That's the idea.
Buck smiled and nodded. He had wanted something like that. Something that gave them a shared direction. Something that wasn't just sitting around and talking about work until everyone was tired. They didn't see each other often anymore. They texted and sent pictures and links. But the actual weekends together were rare enough that Buck guarded them. Once every 6 months, if they were lucky. sometimes longer. He cut the tape on the box carefully and folded the cardboard flaps back. Inside were thick cardboard tiles, stacks of cards sealed in plastic, small plastic miniatures set into a molded tray, and a rulebook heavy enough to feel official. Chris leaned in to look.
This thing has weight.
Buck was plucking out miniatures and examining them.
That's how you know it's serious.
Stephen picked up the rulebook immediately and started flipping pages.
We're not starting until we understand what we're doing.
Chris rolled his eyes and took a drink.
Of course.
Buck lifted the foam insert and set it aside. He arranged the components the way the rulebook diagram suggested. Tiles in stacks, cards sorted by symbol, tokens poured into a cereal bowl they found in the kitchen. Stephen read quickly.
The game uses an app.
I know.
Buck said.
It runs the scenario.
Chris tapped his phone against the table.
I'll download it too.
No,
Stephen said.
we use one device and have it here on the table by the board.
Buck pulled a tablet from his bag and set it between them.
Already have it.
Stephen nodded and kept reading. Chris picked up one of the miniatures. It was a man with sharp features, arm slightly raised, frozen in a gesture that could have been greeting or warning.
That's me.
Chris said. Buck laughed automatically.
Because he's handsome?
Chris laughed.
Your words.
Stephen didn't look up.
Put it back. We're not losing components.
Chris made a show of lowering the figure as if it was a holy relic, taking a step back with his arms out to emphasize his caution. As they laid the figures out, it became clear that each one resembled its player in small, irritating ways. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it was close enough to be noticed. A stocky figure in a knit cap like Buck always wore, one with a smirk reminiscent of Stephen's, and the slender, handsome Chris figure. Buck tapped through his phone and started a playlist. Low volume, no lyrics, just a slow, droning pattern of sound that sat underneath everything else. Stephen glanced over.
Is this supposed to be creepy?
It's just a background.
Buck said.
And yes.
Chris lifted his mug.
It works. I like it. So let's play before we're all too drunk to remember the rules.
They set the board up at the dining table. The tiles clicked together with satisfying alignment. The miniatures were placed at their starting positions. The rulebook stayed open, near Stephen's elbow. Buck opened the companion app. The screen filled with a dim image of a city at night. Smoke rose from chimneys and vents. A river cut through the streets, black and menacing. The app's voice was calm but sinister.
A city stands in the threshold of collapse. Within its districts, a hidden order moves unchallenged. The faithful enter homes uninvited, selecting the unmarked and the unbelieving. Blood is harvested with care. Bodies are left where they fall. Each death advances a design older than the streets themselves. The killings are not random. They are measured, counted, necessary. You have been assembled to interrupt the right. Investigate, contain, prevent further offerings. Time is limited. Failure will result in loss beyond comprehension.
The three exchanged smiles.
This is wild.
Chris said, chuckling. Stephen leaned forward.
Everybody pay attention. Here we go.
Buck tapped the tablet to begin. The town name appeared at the top of the screen. Buck stopped moving and stared. Stephen noticed immediately.
What?
Buck pointed.
Fort Wyndham. That's where I grew up.
Chris leaned in.
No way. Creepy.
Stephen frowned slightly.
It's just a town name.
It's not common.
Buck said, and Chris laughed.
So the game already knows you.
Buck shrugged and tapped forward. The app instructed them to place the starting tile. Buck pulled from the stack and rotated to match the diagram. Stephen assigned character attributes without discussion.
You take this one, Chris. High charm abilities.
Chris accepted the miniature like it was a compliment. Stephen slid another figure toward Buck.
Support role. But a brawler, too.
Buck nodded. Stephen took the last one for himself.
I'll handle the actions.
Chris spoke with mock disgust.
You mean you'll control everything? You monster.
I mean, I'll keep us on track.
Steven said. The first turns were simple. Move, search, interact. The dice were heavy cubes marked with stars and X's. Steven held up a die.
Stars are successes, X's are failures.
Chris rolled first and got 2 stars.
Beautiful stars.
Steven said, and Chris smiled. Buck rolled next and got an X.
Sorry.
Buck said, and Steven waved him off.
It's gonna happen. Just read the consequence card.
They played for nearly an hour. The app described damp hallways, locked doors, the smell of rot in basements. The music continued underneath, low and persistent. Then the app instructed them to place a new tile. Buck drew from the stack and turned it to match the diagram. The tile showed a quiet suburban street, a mailbox, a driveway, a green pickup truck parked along the curb. Chris pointed immediately.
That's your truck, Buck.
It's just a green truck.
Buck said. The game continued. The app's voice shifted.
A vehicle moves through the city after nightfall. The will governing it weakens. A lesser life crosses its path. Correction is attempted and fails. Blood is loosed where no offering was called for. The pattern remains incomplete. This death is counted and disregarded.
The image on the app resolved enough to be clear. It was a dog, lying still beside the road near the green truck. Chris stopped smiling.
That's a bit dark.
Buck stared at the screen. Steven reached for the tablet.
We move on.
Buck's hand came up and touched Steven's wrist before he could stop himself. He pulled it back immediately.
Sorry, I didn't expect that.
Steven studied him for a moment and then nodded and tapped forward. The app offered a choice: investigate the incident or continue the hunt. Steven chose to continue. No one argued. He and Chris reached for the dice. Buck kept his eyes on the board, but his attention had already slipped away. He remembered a different street, one that curved so gently you couldn't see very far ahead. Lawns trimmed to be the same height, driveways full of the same cars. He remembered beer, not enough to fall down, enough to dull the edges. He remembered his headlights catching movement too late. The sound of impact had been soft. That's what had stayed with him, how little noise it made. He remembered stopping and getting out, cold air on his face. The dog was still in the road. He looked for lights, for people, for anything that might tell him what to do. He remembered lifting the dog and pulling it to the grass, as if that mattered. It was still warm. He drove the rest of the way home and sat in his truck in the driveway with the engine off. He had never told anyone. Not then, not later. At the table, Steven rolled the dice. An X. Steven frowned.
Great.
Chris leaned back in his chair.
Maybe the game wants us to fail.
Now, the game doesn't want anything.
Steven said dismissively. The tablet chimed softly as the app advanced. The screen showed a diagram of a municipal building, its underside rendered in cross-section. Pipes crowded the ceiling. A maintenance crawlspace narrowed toward darkness. The app's voice shifted into ceremonial cadence. It spoke of constriction, of spaces designed to be entered only briefly, of breath shortened by space rather than exertion. Steven leaned closer to the screen.
This is a movement check. Medium risk.
Chris rolled his shoulders back.
Send me.
Steven slid the dice toward him. Chris rolled. 1 star, 1 X. Steven read from the tablet.
Partial success. You get through, but there's a psychological consequence.
The app continued.
Memory remains as residue long after its cause has passed. Fear emerges without origin in the present moment, clinging like lichen to stone, sustained by what once was rather than what is. Panic is an inheritance, acquired early and carried forward without consent.
Then it named the source. a child in a narrow closet, a door locked from the outside, a woman unsteady with alcohol. Chris drew in a breath and went still. Buck noticed first. Chris's posture stiffened, his shoulders rising slightly, as if bracing.
That's grim,
Stephen said, and Chris didn't look at him.
That happened to me.
The room seemed to contract around the table. Buck shifted in his chair. Chris's hands lay flat on the table, his fingers spread wide and pale against the wood.
My mom used to lock me in the closet,
Chris said.
when she was drunk. I know I've told you guys.
That's...
Stephen began, then stopped, and Chris exhaled slowly through his nose.
It wasn't a punishment, I don't think.
He continued without prompting.
Not exactly. I think she thought she was protecting me.
He closed his eyes. Chris was 9 or 10 years old. The closet had been in the hallway just outside his bedroom. It smelled like dust and coats that hadn't been worn in years. There was no light inside. His mother's hand on his shoulder had been unsteady. Her breath smelled sharp and sweet at the same time. Stay here, she had said. He had asked how long. He remembered that clearly. She hadn't answered. The door closed. The click of the latch sounded louder in the dark. He stood still at first, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hall. The air was warm and stale. He could hear the television from the living room, laugh tracks rising and falling. Long minutes passed, maybe hours. He couldn't tell. Time in the dark seemed to have no edges. He had knocked, softly at first, then harder. "Mama," he'd called. He remembered sitting down because his legs hurt, his knees pressed against the door, his back against the wall. The coats brushed his face when he moved. He remembered crying without sound, afraid that if he cried too loudly, she would be angry when she came back. Eventually, the door opened. It always did. Light flooded in. His mother stood blinking, confused, holding a glass. "Oh," she had said, "you're still there." At the table, Chris dragged a hand down his face. Buck reached for his mug and realized it was empty. He set it down carefully.
We didn't put anything in the script. Couldn't have.
Buck said.
You have to know that.
Chris nodded once.
I know. That stuff from when I was a kid always finds a way to creep up and sucker punch me.
Stephen cleared his throat.
It's coincidence. The game pulls from a pool of traumatic tropes.
Chris laughed, sharp and humorless.
That's a hell of a pool.
The app advanced. The crawl space resolved. The detectives emerged into a new area. A symbol was found etched into concrete. Time ticked forward in the corner of the screen. Stephen leaned closer to the tablet than he had before. He scrolled back up, then forward again as if checking for consistency.
We're burning minutes.
They played on. No one joked now. The rules were followed exactly. Stephen corrected errors, but his voice had lost its earlier certainty. He reread instructions out loud before acting. Chris focused on the board with forced precision. Buck stopped drinking beer and switched to water without comment. They had wordlessly agreed to focus and see what the game gave them next. The uncanny overlap gnawed at them. The next scenario card described a disturbance in a residential neighborhood. The app's image showed a sagging porch, a door ajar.
That looks just like our house in college,
Stephen said. Then his expression darkened as he realized the weight of what he'd just said. The three of them leaned toward the tablet. Inside the house, a man shouted, his arms flailing wildly. The app's voice spoke.
An intruder occupies the dwelling. He is without home or fixed place, carrying confusion where intent should be. Memory is mistaken for claim, and desperation for threat. Those who encounter him are presented with a single choice: to remove him by force, or to wait him out with patience, accepting the risk inherent in either course.
Buck looked up.
We know this one.
What?
Chris said. Stephen read ahead and then stopped.
This happened.
In college.
Buck said, and Chris nodded in recognition.
The crazy guy. He thought it was his house.
That's right.
Buck said.
He wouldn't leave.
The app prompted them to choose an approach. Stephen hesitated longer than he had on any previous turn. His finger hovered over the screen.
We talked him out. Eventually, remember?
Chris stared at the tablet.
He kept saying his sister lived there.
Buck swallowed.
He cried.
Stephen selected caution and patience. The app resolved the scene the same way their memory did. No violence, no arrest, the man left on his own, confused but unharmed. No one spoke afterward. The app indicated it was Chris's character's turn. The music crept louder without any of them touching the volume. A higher tone threaded through the drone. Stephen noticed. He reached for the speaker, then stopped. He left the volume where it was.
We should finish,
Stephen said, and Chris gave him a vexed look.
Why?
Stephen didn't answer immediately. He picked up the dice and then set them back down.
Because if we stop now, we'll keep thinking about it.
Buck stared at the board.
We have to know if it's real.
Chris laughed softly.
If what's real?
Stephen met Chris's eyes.
All of this.
Stephen held the dice out.
Your turn, Chris.
Chris took them. He rolled. 2 stars. The app advanced. The screen darkened, then filled with a new tableau. 2 figures stood in a narrow room. One leaned forward, the other remained still. The light between them was low and directional, as if it had been placed deliberately to exaggerate the space. The app's voice returned to its ceremonial register.
A bond of friendship exists between the investigators, formed through time and shared respect. That bond is violated when one enters a romantic union with the other's partner in secret. Desire is acted upon without regard for loyalty, and trust is broken without warning. The betrayal is revealed, but not through confession.
Buck leaned in.
That's your character, Chris.
Chris didn't respond. The app continued. The detective who resembled Chris confronted another investigator, one whose features bore an unmistakable resemblance to Stephen. The language was ornate but precise. A breach of marital trust. A bed entered under false pretenses. A relationship sustained in secrecy and ended in discovery. Chris stared at the tablet.
What is this bullshit?
Stephen didn't look up.
It's narrative. It's using conflict to raise stakes.
You're sure about that?
And Buck shifted in his chair.
Hey, come on.
Chris kept his eyes on Stephen,
You want to tell me something?
and Stephen finally looked up.
No. And this isn't real.
Chris held Stephen's gaze for a long moment and then looked back at the board.
Fine.
The app did not linger. It advanced as if the moment had been logged and dismissed. A new scene loaded. The app's voice lowered. The cadence slowed. It spoke of mercy as transgression, of suffering that had exceeded usefulness, of a decision made quietly, without witnesses or ceremony. Stephen frowned.
What are we looking at?
The image resolved into a dim room. A bed. A figure lying still. Another seated beside it. Buck leaned forward.
Steven, that's your guy. What's he doing?
The app identified the character. It was Stephen's.
The act is identified as an intentional ending. A life diminished beyond recovery is brought to conclusion by another's hand. The termination is performed without malice and without permission, framed as relief rather than harm. Such acts are classified as kindness by the one who commits them, and as violation by the order that governs the living.
The image crystallized. The 3 men saw a figure in green scrubs pressing a pillow over the face of the man in the bed. The next frame showed the pillow discarded. The man in the bed was limp, and his eyes were stretched open, gazing up. Stephen's chair scraped softly against the floor as he stood.
No.
Buck looked up at him.
Steven, what is this?
Stephen ran his hands through his hair.
I never. It was not like that.
He sat back down heavily, his shoulders slumped. He covered his face with both hands. Chris didn't move. The app chimed. Stephen began to cry, not loudly, not all at once. His breath hitched. His shoulders trembled as if he were trying to keep himself contained and failing. Buck and Chris stayed where they were. No one spoke. A bell rang from the tablet, low, resonant, different from the other tones. The screen filled with text. The voice announced that the detectives had delayed too long. The ritual was complete. The timer vanished. The app instructed them to resolve the final outcome. Chris reached for the dice. His hands shook as he picked them up.
We're still playing.
Stephen didn't answer, and Buck nodded. Chris rolled. The dice clattered across the table. Stars and X's faced up together. The bell rang again. The app spoke one final time.
The rite has been completed. The measures have been met, and the city now bears the cult's mark. The faithful no longer operate in the shadows. They advance in number, converging on this location beyond disruption.
They looked at one another.
They will force entry. Doors will give way. Walls will fail. The investigators are no longer outside the ritual. The cult marks them for harvest. No further actions are available.
The screen went blank. The droning background music from the speaker fizzled and died. The three of them sat in silence. The front door took a blow that rattled the frame. All three of them turned. No one spoke. The pounding came again, louder.
Thanks for listening to tonight's Terror. If you enjoyed the story, follow, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps new listeners find the show. Visit tonightsterror.com for all our stories, merch, and more. Until next time, sleep well